Bang! Neves Knives. I'm Jared. My lovely wife Kara is at work, and this is the wee Mote. Thanks to Stasa23 for letting us check this out. Definitely go sub to Stasa23's channel if you're not already. But thank you, Stasa, for letting us check out some of your knives. And this is made by Wee Knives, which Wee Knives makes incredible knives. This one's an S35 VN and titanium hardware, clip, backspacer. Nice little hidden lanyard back there that stays nice and out of the way. Love the stone washing that's on the titanium. It's kind of like a bronze finish. And then the stone wash on the blade is also very nice. Now this is not a big knife, and we're going to get right into cutting here in just a second. I did not sharpen it, but I am going to talk about sharpening this knife here in a second. But let's just talk about the size. So the blade length is 2 5/8, so just a tiny bit over 2 1/2. The total length is 6 1/8, which means it's just a tiny bit over 6 inches. Very small knife. Now here, just for a couple size comparisons, here is the Spyderco Chaparral. And you can see the Spyderco Chaparral is just a little bit longer than the wee Mote. A good size comparison is the Kaiser Mini Sheepdog. So this is the small one, obviously. But you can see they are basically the exact same length. And then the Kaiser Yorkie is another one that's very similar in length, you know, in size and everything. Just in case if you don't know those knives, here's a Benchmade Mini Griptillian. A lot of people seem to know this knife, but it is a bit bigger. Now, so this is not going to be a big knife. For me, it's a 3-finger knife. Now, I can kind of get a little bit of a, you know, pinky grip down there at the bottom, but not really. It really doesn't do anything. I just basically slide off every time. So I tend to kind of hold it more upright, like either right over this little, the flipper tab, like that, or like this. My favorite grip seems to be like this, you know, scoring and cutting like this. But let's talk about slicing with it really quick, because I did do some cutting with it, and this thing does have really good geometry. Nice thin blade stock, very, very nice jimping. The jimping is not only well done, but it's also well placed. So if I even go up and smash my finger over the flipper tab, I can still use the jimping, which is really nice. But behind the edge thickness is about 15 thousandths, and it just goes right through cardboard very nicely, especially for such a small knife. You know, when you're dealing with a small knife like this, you want to make sure it passes through materials very well, because it's small in the hand. It's not going to have the best ergos. You're not going to get the most leverage out of this kind of knife. But in this case, the blade does pass through very nicely. No complaints on the way it slices. And for the utility cuts, this is more of a utility cutter. Now it slices very good, but if you look at the blade shape has kind of a beak thing going. I don't know what you'd call it. You can call this sheep's foot, you can call it a drop point, you can call it whatever you want, but you get a lot of leverage behind that tip. So, and like I said, you know, my favorite grip is like this. And scoring, cutting, or should I say scoring, utility cuts, anything where you're using the tip is a good, acute tip, yet strong enough for, you know, repeated utility cuts. And it just works really good. And even though it's very small, you have a lot of control. And sometimes with a small knife for a utility cutter, it winds up working out really good because you have so much control over the knife. And so if you're cutting out shapes, if you're opening stuff up, if, you know, for whatever reason, you're doing utility cuts, this thing works great, especially for such a little knife. Now, let's talk about the action. The action is really good. It has a very minimal flipper tab and internal stop pins. So when it does deploy, you see that's the stop pin right there. It comes around, there's a groove cut in on both sides of the scales, and you can see the little groove right there where the stop pin locks into, and the frame lock goes into place. So the flipper tab is very minimal, but very easy to flip. Now it's more, I mean, I guess you can easily light switch it. That's probably the easiest way, but you can do kind of a push button light switch combo, because just doing a push button doesn't really work. But if you push it and drag down at the same time, it does work. So, but the action's really nice. I tend to mostly light switch it. Detent is nice and crisp. Very clicky detent. I like detents like that. The detent, when you unlock it, it's not really early, but you can get past it very easily. It's kind of like right at the limit, because you see how close it is to my finger, but it doesn't seem to play around in the detent ball. Some knives, when you unlock it right there, they tend to want to play around. This one doesn't really do that. The drop on it, as you can see, it's not real drop shutty or anything, but it's a very light blade, very small, but you can easily just slap it shut without an issue, or let it hit the detent ball and slap the spine of it, because it doesn't have a detent ramp. But no big deal, because it really doesn't need one too bad, and it's a small knife, so I tend to do that a lot. Just kind of let it hit it and then slap it shut, and if it does go past, I still just slap it shut. And I mean with my finger, but you can also do it with your wrist. Access to the lock bar is pretty decent. They did bring this side of the scale back just a little bit. Not a lot, but enough to where you can get it just going sideways with your thumb, or you can kind of squeeze into this little groove right there and push it sideways. Not a lot of access, but it still works just fine. So the action is great. Or good, at least. Hardware, big hardware. Love to see big hardware. This is T8 hardware like we usually uses, even on the clip, and it's all titanium. I love WE's hardware. WE does some of the best hardware, or should I say some of the best titanium hardware, because I've seen a lot of titanium hardware that is not good. Not good at all. They're very soft. They strip out so easily. I almost get worried sometimes when I see some companies that have titanium hardware, because I've stripped them out so many times. But WE's hardware, it's hardened titanium, and it's really good hardware. Let's talk about the clip. The clip in and out of the pocket's just fine. It is a little bit sharp. I don't think it's going to be tearing up any pants or anything like that, because it does go in and out of the pocket just fine. It sits rather deep, because it doesn't have to get away from the lanyard hole, because the lanyard hole is tucked in the back of it. So it sits rather deep, easy to get to. It's pretty easy to get out, deploy, and put back in the pocket. So no complaints. The titanium clip works just fine. It is a small, thin clip. Good tension from it. And yeah, it just works really good. There seems like there's plenty of room underneath it. In the hand, it doesn't really bother me, but I also tend to use different grips that's not like this, you know, with this knife. So, but let's check out this backspacer really quick. The backspacer looks great. It's like a gold color. It almost looks like a brick of gold back there. Very shiny. It's polished, and it looks really good. It just pops with the hardware and the bronzing over the whole thing. Looks really good. Love the stone washing. And then, you know, the backspacer is not stone washed, so it really makes it pop since it's on top of all this stone washing. So let's talk about some bad things. So there's only a couple. So one thing is this doggone choil. This choil sucks. Now, one, they didn't give you a good sharpening choil. The sharpening, I mean, yeah, you can probably sharpen it if, you know, like once or twice without hitting the plunge grind, but it's very close to it. Now, that's not necessarily my biggest complaint. My biggest complaint is it's so tight against this thing right here. So now, if I want to sharpen it, let me get something. Since it's a WE knife, I'll just use one of their budget brands, the Sencut box, to show this. To get to there, you see how close it is hitting this flipper tab? So when you're doing it, like, you're going to have a huge chance of smacking that thing every time you come back or forth. You're going to be grinding that against your stone. So I don't like that. I would way rather see it have a little bit more of a choil, a little tiny bit less cutting edge, because I'm not really using this part of my cutting edge anyways. I mean, it's so tight up against this flipper tab. Just put in a nice choil. That way I can get more sharpenings out of it. And, you know, and it just makes things easier. So that is something I do not like. Next thing, this isn't that big of a deal, but I'm just going to mention the detent hole is pretty exposed, like a lot of knives. So it's not just this knife, but you see how exposed it is. Now, since this has internal stop pins, it's pretty open up top here. So when you're cutting, especially if you're cutting upright like this, things can fall down in there and get in the pivot. And, you know, just like any knife, it can do that, but, you know, it's really exposed with this knife, you know, being that it's internal stop pins, but you have that detent hole. So you're going to want to be careful and make sure that stays nice and cleaned out, because it can, you know, mess up the action if something gets stuck in there. Other than the choil, really, there's really no bad. I mean, everything's really good on this thing. I even like how they put a little groove in the spacer right here for the blade to kind of nestle in. So that's really awesome. It is nice and centered. You can't get to the blade. Lots of milling. So even for such a light blade, it's even lighter due to all the you know, the cutouts inside here, making it, you know, a little lighter. So this is a very light knife, just a good knife overall. I mean, it is a good quality knife. Now, I didn't sharpen it, one, because of that choil area. Yeah, I could have threw it on a fixed angled system and sharpened it and probably would have been just fine. I mean, I would imagine it'd be just fine. So for systems, this will probably work out fine. I don't think you'll have to worry about hitting this too bad. Maybe though, because it is, you know, like right there. It's hard to say. I didn't put one on there. S35VN is a good blade steel. Titanium's, you know, obviously this is uses higher end materials. In my opinion, this wouldn't be a primary knife. This is going to be a side knife. This is going to be a secondary knife, something you keep in a fifth pocket or something you keep next to your big knife, because, you know, it's going to be hindered in size just a little bit. And since you can't really get a full grip on it. Now, can somebody use this as a primary? Absolutely. It just depends on your cutting needs and what you use a knife for. For me personally, you know, I'd rather get the benefits out of something just a little bit bigger and keep this as a side knife. Something, you know, when you're, you know, at the post office or, you know, something like that, or in your office. Maybe, you know, you work in an office or something. But awesome knife. I love you guys. Thanks for watching. Stasa23. Thank you, bud. We love you. Peace.